Hi, this is Greg Magnan from Seattle University with a little review of managing inventory. And this video is going to be an introduction to the topic. Here's our roadmap we use to guide our understanding of operations and operations strategy. And you'll see inventory down there on the lower right-hand side, one of the infrastructural decisions to support our order winning criteria of the customer value proposition. In this case, inventory is supporting the value proposition. It's also key to the decision of whether we build to order or make to stock or even assemble to order. Are we making finished goods in a make to stock setting? Are we not really building anything until we get an order, or assemble to order? Think of the way perhaps McDonald's assembles burgers now. They don't cook it to order. They assemble their burger, their sandwich, with a pre-cooked burger patty in a warming drawer, and then assemble that to your customer desires, with onions, without onions, all those choices we have. Inventory is related to a few other things in our lower decision-making box. The capacity and process of a production line, let's say, production process, is producing inventory or having work in process inventory in between stages of that. And if we're buying inventory from outside, it's coming from suppliers. And then finally, inventory being on the books, it's part of the income statement, part of the balance sheet. It's a current asset that may or may not be adding value in the eyes of the CFO. Here's an old shot of a teardown of a Nintendo handheld gaming device. We'll be talking in a subsequent video about the inventory of all these components that go into a device. The inventory management approaches for, let's say, the upper bottom enclosure is going to be different than the way we manage the inventory of the overall finished product. We'll talk about that more later on. So here's what we know about inventory. It's related to the operation system. You can see some of the connections. I already talked about processes and equipment utilization, and we're producing inventory, activating the capacity of a process. And I just mentioned about the notation on the income statement. We're converting inventory into revenue. It's performance on the balance sheet, and then cash flow. If you have inventory balance and then you sell that inventory, you're converting the inventory into a positive cash flow. At the bottom there, it talks about the priorities being supported delivery speed. Salespeople want to have a lot of inventory so they can sell, they can close that deal right away. And it might be true that the CFO wants a different level of inventory, maybe lower. That's that cost and service trade-off. High service levels mean higher inventory levels. That means higher cost. It also might support product flexibility by holding components that we then delay their differentiation until we get an order. That assemble to order model I was just talking about with McDonald's burger. So here's just some shots of things happening regarding inventory. In this case, they're unloading a truck. This roll-up conveyor belt is coming in to help move the boxes out of the truck and then restacking them. Finished goods inventory of cars coming off of a freighter, air freight. Here's inventory of coffee cherries before they become coffee beans. So this is an input to a process, some raw materials inventory. Here's some whiskey casks from the Kilchoman Distillery in Islay in Scotland, and then racks and racks and racks of Coca-Cola, finished goods inventory in that context. So why do we have inventory? And the reason is to protect against uncertainty. Inventory exists for a reason. It's not the Jetsons. We can't push a button on the wall and have a sandwich appear immediately. Things take time. We're a little bit unsure of what demand might be. We might be unsure of the reliability of supply, so we need some protection, some buffer around that. You might have some inventory because you are buying extra. If you're a Costco shopper, you buy stuff, perhaps more than you need for that day. Why? Because you got a nice value on high quality product, but you have some extra inventory that might be happening. You might buy some anticipatory inventory. If you're seeing a price increase in the future, you might buy more now before the price goes up. That's holding on to inventory, but you think you're getting a good deal. As I mentioned, supporting delivery speed, fast closing of an order, and then inventory on the road or on the train tracks. That in transit or transportation is inventory that has to move physically between locations. Probably aware of these different types. You've seen them in accounting, seen them in readings. Raw materials that are inputs. Work in process are the things that we are producing. So in these bolts of garment here are raw material to an apparel manufacturing company, and as they're being sewn into garments, into shirts, into blouses, whatever, then they become work in process inventory. Once that's completed, they become finished goods. And then MRO items are things we would maybe use, like needles for the sewing machines in the apparel factory. That would be an MRO kind of inventory notion. Here's a little bit of a process, different kinds of inventory of the whiskey making. Also on Islay, this is the Laphroaig distillery at the bottom, and it looks like a 10-year-old bottle. So as a starts with water and barley, and then at Laphroaig, they're going to dry that barley out. Laphroaig is a very peaty barley, so we need some peat raw material that will be cooked, be burned to create the smoke that then infiltrates the peat. And then eventually that barley, or infiltrates the barley, I should say, the peat smoke does. And then we're going to cook that barley into the mash tun or the lauter tun to create the wort that will get cooked off in a still. And maybe that might happen 3 or 4 times as they're extracting the alcohol or collecting the alcohol there in the top of those. And then it goes into barrels. In this case, for Scottish whiskey, these barrels, they have to be used. So oftentimes there's a relationship between American bourbon makers. Bourbon has to go into brand new wood, into virgin wood, and Scottish whiskey has to go into used wood. So the Scottish whiskey producers will be buying used barrels, and then they'll fill them up and then put them on the rack in the warehouse. How long will they be in there? Well, that depends. It's a very interesting cash flow issues for distillery operators of how long should they hold on to whiskey. The longer they hold it, the more valuable it is. Although a little bit of that whiskey leaves in the air. It's called the angel's share that escapes out of a cask in the warehouse. And then finally they can sell that little dram. All right, there are carrying costs. This is why the CFO doesn't like it. There's cash tied up. It costs money to operate a warehouse here. You can see there's labor, there's systems that she's using to read inventory. There's some software happening there and all sorts of heat and utilities, insurance. All those are factors that will come into inventory. What kind of measures? Average inventory, and you might think of average inventory if you're looking at a company's financial statements. What do they have at the end of last year and the end of this year? We'll take an average of that number and use that to calculate things like how many weeks of supply do we have on hand. On this other page, we'll also calculate or use average inventory value to calculate how many times we're turning over our usual inventory level, and that's the average inventory into our sales. At the bottom of the slide, we have cycle service level. That's a metric around the probability of a stock out. In this case, the stock out will not occur, and it's 1 minus that probability. So what's the in-stock percentage that we're looking at here during that lead time or that order cycle? So the order cycle is the time between we placed an order and then we receive the order in-house. We don't want to have a stock out, or we might have a stock out or plan for one in that window. Fill rate is what percentage of orders are you filling for your customers. And if you have big customers, big retail customers, say Walmart, they have very high expectations on fill rate. You should be filling 98, 99% of what is on the invoice. And if you're not, you'll be receiving some penalties from Walmart on that performance. And then cash conversion cycle. This is also something that the CFO is interested in, the velocity of inventory through our system. The CCC, the cash conversion cycle, is measured in number of days, and it's number of days until we pay out to suppliers. And then that cash is out, and then when we receive cash back in from customers, that's the cash conversion cycles. Some companies can have a negative cash conversion cycle, and that might be a good thing. So let's say you're a large manufacturing company with power over your suppliers, and you have terms in there to not pay them for 30 days or 45 days or 60 days. If you can get that inventory, let's say you don't pay for it for 30 days, and right when you own it, you're converting it into a sale. Let's say your Dell computer, and you're selling that computer to somebody buying online. You're getting the money from the customer right away from their credit card. you still have maybe 30 or 40 days left to pay your suppliers. So CFOs like that. They're using the customer's money for a while until they owe the supplier. But that's really all about velocity through the system, velocity through the supply chain of that, velocity of the inventory happening there. And then finally, a way to classify inventory. And this might be more useful to those components that went into the Nintendo 3D or 3DS that we looked at earlier, the components. And some of those components are going to be more valuable. Those are the A items. The B items are the least valuable. And the C items might be things like little screws or clips that make up a lot of the volume, but not a lot of the cost, right? So in this case, we have this 20% of the volume here on our curve makes up 80%. You might have heard of that 80-20 rule. Where did that come from? An old Italian economist, Vilfredo Pareto, and you might know the 80-20 rule or the Pareto principle. Well, he's the guy. He was studying the distribution of wealth in Italy in the 1800s, and guess what he realized? 80% of the wealth in Italy at the time was held by 20% of the people. Maybe those are ratios that are coming back in some countries. All right, that's the end of our intro to inventory. We'll see you in our next video talking about decisions made in inventory management and different kinds of demand. See you there.